Greetings everyone, I'm happy to introduce you to my Whirlwind build on Diablo IV Barbarian with a mix of critical damage, bleeding and explosions. You'll see that it's quite a cool build to play and that you can easily push in Torment Nightmare dungeons. So first I'll explain you how you want to keep Berzerk when you did it. You can trigger Berzerk with this spell, the ultimate and this node in order to grant Berzerking if you kill a bleeding enemy. You also have this legendary power, it will extend the duration of Berzerking. So basically, when you need it, you'll always be under Berzerking. For the skills you have the 3 shots, the first one Rallying Cry for the unstoppable, the War Cry for the DPS and the challenging shot just because you have some good synergy with it. You'll see that in the legendary powers but also in the Paragon setup. Then you have the ultimate and the frenzy in order to grant you damage reduction. Of course, lastly, the Whirlwind. For the gear you have a chance to get some Fortify when you did direct damage while Berzerking, make sure to have a better stats than my current one. Then the armor for the extended duration of Berzerking, and these gloves in order to deal massive AoE damage after Whirlwind. Then you want damage reduction with basic attack, whirling pulling enemies and increase critical strike chance with Whirlwind. Then bleeding damage with Berzerking, increasing core skill with basic attack and increasing core skill damage with maximum fury. You also have a last one here, increasing damage based on your primary resource. After you want the fury for the shot and this one which will reduce shot cooldowns. For the expertise you'll want the 200 axe expertise, increasing damage to vulnerable enemies and giving you also increased critical strike chance, but if you want you can also try this one for the bleeding damage. Lastly, for the gems you'll want damage reduction on Fortify, increased critical strike damage to vulnerable enemies and diamonds. For the stats, make sure to get some strength in order to boost your overall DPS and core skill damage. You can also get everything boosting your damage, for example damage while Berzerking, on bleeding enemies and so on. And lastly, some critical strike chance and a bit of lucky hit. Now for the skill tree you want to get the frenzy with the damage reduction and then we'll get to Whirlwind with the bleeding damage. You also want this passive to make enemies vulnerable and then you have some damage reduction just here and our defensive setup. The Rallying Cry with the fortification, the shot with just this passive here and the War Cry with the damage increase. You also want 3 points here, here and here in order to grant you duration, life and damage reduction with your shots. You have 3 points here for the damage reduction and this one increasing critical strike on CC enemies and this one damage to close enemies with some damage reduction. After that you'll want this passive to increase bleeding damage to vulnerable enemies. Here you got some damage with 45 and a bit below our ultimate and critical strike damage just here. Lastly, you'll want this one which will give a good boost to your Whirlwind. So now for the Paragon setups you want to have this glyph in order to boost your Berzerking damage and we'll get this one just here which will increase the damage that bleeding enemies take. You can also take this passive here and then we'll get to our second glyph increasing damage to close enemies. You also have this one for physical damage and bleeding damage and don't forget to get the dexterity node in order to boost this glyph. Then we'll get to the third board with this glyph granting you increased damage to bleeding enemies. You also have this passive just here and you want this legendary node which can grant you Berzerking on killing a bleeding enemies. Then you get this node for the Berzerking damage and a bit of duration and you'll go at the bottom in order to have this glyph. You want the vulnerable damage and make sure to take this passive too. You can take it a bit later but you don't want to take this one because it will just increase your attack speed. So it doesn't matter too much since it doesn't work on the Whirlwind. Then you get through these nodes for the damage and the duration and you also have some damage just here and we'll get to the last board with this legendary power giving you a chance to make a vulnerable on a lucky hit and the last glyph reducing the cooldown of your shots. Make sure to take the blue nodes because they will be boosted by this glyph. But also be careful because you just need 40 strength, so don't put too much strength and then you take the blue node, this one for the damage reduction, here some vulnerable damage and some dexterity. Lastly, to finish the Paragon setup you have this one increasing damage with 200 slashing and vulnerable damage. As usual, I'll let you enjoy the gameplay, and for this build you just want to use your shots when you see a pack of elites. You can use your ultimate too, or keep it if you have a larger pack of elites, for example with some champions. For bosses it's the same, and in any case you'll see that you can easily melt anything down. I hope you like this build, and as usual, if you have any question, feel free to post in the comments. If you like the content of the channel, don't forget to subscribe. Thanks!